Welcome everyone to the United Ways of the Pacific Northwest ALICE launch event for the state of Washington. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Jim Cooper. I'm the president and CEO of the United Ways of the Pacific Northwest, which is the trade association for Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. We really appreciate you being on the line today so we can roll out the new ALICE report for the state of Washington. Just a quick couple of logistical items, and then I'll introduce our MC. Everyone is muted, and so when we get closer to question and answer, I'll look for hands raised or chat questions and make sure that we answer them all. We will prioritize media questions first, so if you are a member of the media, please put that in your chat when you ask a question. As well, it would be great if you're having any bandwidth issues. If you turn off your video, that might help your experience if your internet bandwidth is low. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Donna Ponipinto. She's the president and CEO of the United Way of Pierce County in Tacoma. And Donna is also a board member for the United Ways of the Pacific Northwest. She's a past president of the board, and she's also the founder of ALICE in the Pacific Northwest. She had experience with ALICE when she was working for United Way in Michigan and brought it to us when she was hired in Pierce County. So Donna, welcome, and thank you for being our MC today.
Well, thank you, Jim, and again, welcome. Everyone, I'm so pleased to see that we have such a great turnout, and again, on behalf of the 21 United Ways serving 31 counties in Washington, we'd like to welcome the media from across Washington, city, county, and state officials, and business leaders, community leaders, to take part in this rollout this afternoon. As so many of you know, across Washington, local United Ways are fighting for the health, education, and financial stability of every person in our communities. And data, again, as we all know, helps us identify and focus on the most important needs in our community. And this report, ALICE, is central to our efforts to gain the greatest lift and stability for the most people in our communities throughout Washington. So thank you again for being here. Our agenda, our agenda for this includes Jim, who welcomed everyone at the beginning, who represents United Ways of the Pacific Northwest. He's going to, in a few minutes, highlight the data. Following Jim, you'll hear from 3 community leaders, each providing their thoughts on this information, and then we'll wrap up with questions. And again, as Jim mentioned at the beginning, if you do have questions, please put those in the chat box and we'll answer those as we go along. So this is the third ALICE report for Washington, and it remains the unique data and information tool for understanding the actual number and complex circumstances of Washingtonians who are working hard, earning more than the federal poverty number, but not enough to meet a survival budget right where they live in Washington. Through a standardized methodology that assesses the cost of living in every county, this project provides a comprehensive measure of the financial hardship across the U.S. So equipped with this data, ALICE partners convene, advocate, and innovate in their local communities to highlight the issues faced by ALICE households to generate solutions to promote financial stability. This particular grassroots movement represents United Ways corporations and has grown to 22 states. And when I was back in Michigan, when I was with United Way for Southeastern Michigan, I believe we were part of the first cohort of states that joined into the ALICE movement. And so part of the ALICE movement is to put a face to ALICE, to change the vernacular from working poor which is a term I don't like to use, to Alice. And Alice gives a face to those individuals that are working every day. And so what we do, conduct research and produce reports, lead a learning community, and inspire action. So over the past several years, and now with the third update, and especially under the influence of the current pandemic, it's very clear that Washington relies on Alice. When you think about the essential workers, they're living paycheck to paycheck, and you know, before they were essential, you know, they were essential before. I should say they were essential workers before the term essential workers. And Alice delivers and stocks our grocery stores. Alice teaches and cares for our youngest children, raises and picks and helps manufacture our food, repair our vehicles, and the list goes on and on. Alice, our hospitality and resort workers, our sanitation and cleaning workers, you know, and much more. The Washington economy relies on Alice. What makes this information so valuable is the unique but very real context of survival budgets for each county and census tract. This is micro level data that Jim is going to take us through in a second about Washingtonians right where we live, where we work, and contribute to the community. And we can clearly see and hopefully work to lift our Alice workers from survival mode to stability with this information. So before we launch into the new data, we'd like to invite you to participate in
Donna, that's a mistake. Just skip that slide, okay?
Oh,
Sorry.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Jim because we've had some wonderful sponsors that have made this Alice report possible. And I don't know if Jim mentioned this at the beginning, but that we are the only tri-state report. So our report is comprehensive of Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jim.
Thank you, Donna. I really appreciate that introduction. And, you know, this, as with many projects, this couldn't be done without our sponsors. And our sponsors know how important it is to challenge that federal poverty line and its lack of ability to actually describe financial instability across the region. And so thank you to Avista, the Ford Family Foundation, the Idaho Community Foundation, Idaho Nonprofit Center, Providence Healthcare, WaFd Bank, and WSECU. Without their support, we would not be able to accomplish this massive lift to give you this information that I'm about to preview. We also have a most excellent research advisory committee in the region representing researchers from across Washington, Oregon, and Idaho to help make sure that we have a local slant on the narrative and that the data makes sense in our local communities. So here's a list of that diverse group, and we're really thankful. So thank you to any of the research advisory committee members that are on the call for participating. As you'll see, if you've had experience with Alice before, we have more local variation in the data, a better reflection of household composition, more ability to change household sizes and types. We have a new survival budget specific to seniors and a national Alice Essentials Index. In a moment, you'll see a pretty amazing interactive website. And as we go, I'll talk a little bit about the COVID-19 crisis that's landed in our laps right as we roll out this data. I think the big thing to think about with Alice is, you know, we know what the poverty line is, and Alice is what that actual survival budget, as Donna mentioned. And when we think about that, you know, all of those families, about 33% of households in Washington state struggling to get by from any given day. They're only one broken down car or appliance away from possibly not being able to feed their family or maybe even losing their home. And COVID is that disaster times 10 for those families, thinking about losing their employment, you know, and all of the implications of the current health and economic crisis. So it's really important that we remember that and think about this report as two things. One, the baseline for where we were in 2018, which is coming out of the Great Recession, and with a few years of data, and really to demonstrate that we as a society must do a much better job recovering from this recession, which is caused by the COVID health and economic crises that are in all of our laps. And so we hope that you'll think about that twofold, that we must recover better, and we have a lesson to learn in that. In fact, in Washington State, in the last decade, the ALICE population has increased by 76%. So with that, I'll go ahead and switch over to the website, and I'll give you a preview of the data. So what you're seeing here is the ALICE in the Pacific Northwest, actually for Washington. I have dropped I dropped the recording in the chat box. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm just getting a note that somehow we got blocked off at 100 people, and I increased my limit. So I apologize, and we'll make sure that we get the recording out to the people who were unable to join us. That's really too bad. So here you can see, I'll orient you a little bit to the website, and then we'll walk through some of the data. So in the middle here are the tabs that are most important that will allow you to look at every state in the nation. You can even look at a national overview, which gives a 3-year average of the ALICE population for all 50 states, the methodology. And then here is the link to the narrative, the new narrative report for this year, as well as a data spreadsheet that has the data from all of the points that are used in the report. On this high-level page, you can see the numbers I referenced a few minutes ago. The ALICE threshold is 67% of our families are above the ALICE threshold, with 10% in poverty and 23% here, making up 33% of the population of households being under that ALICE threshold in the survivability budget. Scrolling down, we can look at all of the households in Washington State by county. And so when I hover over Donnes County and Pierce County, you can see total households 328,000, with 31% being below the ALICE threshold. And we'll compare that to Pacific County, where we have 48% of the households below the ALICE threshold. You can also see the numbers in text for every county here. One of the neat features of this page is you have the ability to look at it by family type. And so we can zero in on single female-headed households, and notice that the whole map of our state gets much darker. We look at somewhere like Grant County in the middle of eastern Washington, 87% of the single female-headed households are under the ALICE threshold. Or Clallam County, out on the northwest tip of our state, where 79% of those single female-headed households. So one of the things that's really great about this website is it gives us the ability to disaggregate the data. We can actually see the inequality and the discrepancy by different population. And in a moment, I'll show you some of those demographics by age and race as well. So before I do that, I'll show you quickly the new National ALICE Essentials Index. This is a comparison of the ALICE, a created index by our sponsors who created this, the United Way of Northern New Jersey. They created an index to compare ALICE to the Consumer Price Index. And many of you know the Consumer Price Index is a figure that's used nationally to adjust salaries for cost of living. Governments use it to adjust their fees and permits. And so it's pretty widely used. And if you look at since 2007, comparing the Consumer Price Index nationally to this new ALICE Essentials and looking at the cost of survival budget across the country, that the ALICE numbers have risen much more steeply over that time, and demonstrates that it's actually the inflation is much worse than you see in that age-old Consumer Price Index. We're also able to drill down and look at that urban versus rural and see the difference in the line for the urban parts of the state or of the nation and the rural parts of the nation. So I'll go on the demographics tab next. We have the ability to look at this by county, so you can select any county in the state, which I'll do in a second. But we'll first look at the populations of families with children in Washington, and you can see great discrepancy when we look at around 70% of the single female-headed households in Washington are struggling to get by. And you can even see that the single male-headed households are higher than the state average of 33. We can look at that by age. Two things stand out very clearly, that people under 25 and people over 65 have a much higher ALICE population than the state on average. Again, when we look at race, we can see discrepancies and inequities in the data when it's disaggregated. I think everyone in the nation is talking about racial inequality or inequity at the moment, and the ALICE data shows that very clearly, and it stands out much more clearly when you drill down at the county or the city level. But right here, you can see that Black and Hispanic families in Washington state are running nearly 10% higher than the state average. Even Hawaiian families and for sure two-race families are running higher they have more ALICE families compared to the state as a whole. So we'll pick Donna's County again, and we'll look at Pierce County just quickly around those same demographics. Where you can see it's a very similar picture to the state, with higher numbers of single female and single male headed households having more ALICE population. And by age, very comparable to the state, with the increase in the ages under 25 and over 65. When we look at race, we can see that similar discrepancy for Blacks, Hispanics, and two race households. And so it's a really nice tool for the conversation we're having around racial inequity across the country. The first thing to understanding that inequity, and that inequity in institutional and societal or systemic racism shows up in the financial stability data as well as it does everywhere else. We can look at our household budget now, and this is a demonstration of the household budget across the state of Washington. We can look at it by county as well. And in this graphic, it's kind of neat. You can churn on and off certain pieces of the budget. So we could take out, so if you were in a place that had universal health care, you could take out the cost of health care. If you were in a place where you needed no transportation, you could take out the cost of transportation. You can see when you hover over any one of these stacks, what each individual piece costs. So when we look at a household survival budget for one adult, we can see that the highest thing is cost of housing. When we do that for a family of 4, we can see that the highest thing by far is childcare. So when we now look at this by geography, I'm going to try and increase the size. I don't know if it will work. Hopefully that worked for the folks who are having trouble seeing it. I also pasted the link in the chat at the top. So if you want to, you can go in and do this while I'm talking. So when we hover over Pierce County, we can see some family types and the cost of living. So to be a single adult and meet that survival budget in Pierce County, you have to make $12.25 an hour. In Washington State, that is actually lower than the minimum wage. So that is nice. But when you look at that family of 4 with 2 kids in childcare, you need to make $76,000 as a family in order to meet that survival budget. And when we look at King County to the north, you can see that same family that needs to make $94,000 a year in order to get by. And then towards the bottom, we can see that survival budget all laid out by family type with the totals at the bottom. And then just know that if you select any given county here, so if we select Clallam County, it will change the entire map or the entire data set to only show the Clallam County data, their budgets, both by map type and with tag at the bottom. And then lastly, there's a really nice graphic at the bottom that gives you the cost in the county or the state, depending on what view you're looking at. So you can make up any specific family type that you would like to see. I am pasting the link in the chat box again for those who came in after I did it. So yeah, lastly, here you can see that you can add a school-age child to any budget by adding 11,292. So you can kind of pick and choose what family type you'd like to build. We have an analysis of the labor force, which allows us to look at what pay levels different jobs are making. So we can see that we have 612,000 jobs in Washington state that are making $10 to $15 an hour. And as we know, with the exception of some federal employees, everyone in Washington state should be making $13.50 an hour at this point. Though there are federal jobs that only pay the federal minimum wage of $7.20 an hour. We can look at our labor force a little more granularly by county as well as statewide. I'll only show this statewide, but here we can see, some of the shifting pieces of the labor force. And so we're at a historical all-time high of people not participating in the labor force. And that can include people who are gig workers under the table, people who are on disability, people who are in school, or people who are retired. And then, those are people who are not participating in the standard traditional job market or in the unemployment market. Or in the unemployment system. It's not really a market. We can then also see the number of jobs by firm size. And so we can see that the vast majority of Washingtonians work in firms either less than 20 people, there's 550,000 jobs there, or in firms over 500 people where you have 1.3 million of the jobs. And I will just say that when you drill down into this by county, almost every county in our state, with the exception of King County, the vast majority is in those small firms of 0 to 20. Some of your larger companies like Amazon and Boeing really skew the statewide data for the large firms. So we have a new set of indicators here for resource gaps. And so this is the one that is provided to all of the states who partner on the ALICE project with the United Way of Northern New Jersey. And then there are other resources that can be mapped if folks are interested. There will be a cost to that. But this is the where ALICE population lives in relationship to where libraries are located. And so a good example of that is here is Clallam County, which is quite large geographically. and you can see the concentration of where Alice families live compared to the location of the libraries. We can also look at indicators within Alice, and this is so one of the most common terms or lines I've heard people say since the COVID crisis is my friends who live out in the rural areas. They say that rural broadband needs to be real and it needs to be a thing because they're really struggling to work under the stay home, stay healthy order from the governor with limited internet access. And so this is internet access, not broadband. So it's important to make that distinction. But when you click on a county like, let's look at King County that has, 30% of the county below the Alice threshold, they have a 90% internet access rate. Versus if we looked at for Adams County, 48% of those households are below the Alice threshold, but only 66% of the county has access to internet. And then the last tab I'll show is the county profile tab. And this is where you really have the ability to look at the drilling down into a more local data set. So you see the statewide households, and this is the number I talked about earlier, where that upper line of Alice growth represents a 76% increase over almost a decade in the Alice population in Washington state, where you can see a slight downward trend, though our state is very flat in poverty. And that suggests that our anti-poverty programs actually worked quite well. They've maintained that near 11% poverty rate, but we're not bringing them to scale into the families who are struggling to get by based on that survival budget or the actual cost of living in each part of the state. But now that I've said that, I'll go ahead and put Donna's county back on, and we'll look at Pierce County. And this will generate a report for Pierce County. And all of these pages have a kind of a gray button at the top where you can export a PDF, a nice PDF of the report. We can see the population, the number of households, the median household income, the unemployment rate in 2018. And I think this is a very important data point to talk about. You know, we were down below that only 4 months ago. And now we're sitting at Washington State having slightly higher than 30% unemployment. We are the highest unemployment in the nation at the moment. And I'll tell you that prior to COVID, we were nearly the highest state in the nation with people above the Alice threshold. We're doing very well compared to other states in the country. And now we sit at the highest unemployment in the nation. We were down to 8% of our families in the state in poverty, in Pierce County, sorry, my bad. So you can see the Pierce County poverty line actually taking a more noticeable dip between 2016 and 2018. But you can also see the Alice number starting to tick down there. So it demonstrates that Washington State was starting to get on the right track and bring down the Alice families. You can also know that when these families fall from poverty, they move into Alice primarily. You know, sometimes they're very lucky and they can move above the Alice threshold. You can see that household data points on a bar graph also, so we can look at the percentages for each of those years. Again, for Pierce County, and see that they're sitting at 69%, almost 70% of the households in Pierce County are doing well outside of the survival budget. And it's important to point out that, you know, that's not a flourishing budget. That's a survival budget where you can meet your needs of your family and get by, but you're not saving any money. You don't have money left over at the end of the month to go to a movie at all. We can look at those types of households like we saw earlier and see that families with children, there's 17,000 of them plus 8,000 in the poverty and Alice numbers. Again, that number goes up for population 65 and older. You can also see those budget types for Pierce County, and that will change based on which county you've selected above. You can see the labor force numbers like we showed just for that county. And then the last piece here, you can see the breakdowns of the subdivisions of the county. And so we can look at census designated places like cities, and we'll click on Pierce County, and that'll show us the numbers for the different parts of the county. And so we can see here that in Tacoma City, you have 10% poverty plus 26% Alice. So we're looking at 36% compared to 33% statewide. Similarly for Fort Lewis, for South Hill, South Creek, and then you kind of get out in other parts, Anderson Island and other parts of the county. At the bottom, it will show you the list of all of the census subdivisions in text and their percentages for the entire county. And so that will do the same thing for zip code and for federal census tracts. Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop sharing that. I'm going to bring the slide deck back up, and we'll turn it back over to Donna.
Okay, thank you, Jim. I was just looking to see if our next speakers are on the line. Thank you. This, I tell you, we've come a long way in this report since the first iteration several years ago. This is a tool that I know United Way's use, others in our communities use this tool for a lot of different reasons. It could be helping businesses to evaluate their wages, help city, county officials clarify their strategies, and help in funding decisions as well. But I think the biggest, for me, the Alice report is really a starting, it's a talking point. It's a place where we can start to really look at the data that's presented, drill down and see what that data means for us and the work that we're doing in our respective communities. So just really excited to see the new features on this latest iteration. So now what I'd like to do is to introduce three speakers. Well, I don't know if we'll have all three, but we're gonna see who we have. I know David is on the line. I believe I saw him. So David Condon is the VP for Eastern Washington for Premera. Premera is the largest health plan in the Pacific Northwest and serves more than 2 million people, from individuals and families to employees of Fortune 100 companies. And David is also the former mayor of Spokane. So I'm going to turn it over to David for a few minutes.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be a part of this. And I'll tell you, I'll kind of do about three kind of iterations of my utilization of Alice. I'll tell you, it's several years ago now as I served as the 44th mayor of Spokane. It literally really level-setted my administration as I came in. It's now nearly 9 years ago, but I was elected because of the cost of utilities, and particularly the city of Spokane runs a water, stormwater, sewer, and garbage utility. And we had double-digit increases in those costs, and particularly water rates had gone up 16% in a single year. And so as you look at that, it was the #1 reason why I was elected. And it really, although I did not know it at the time, focused on the Alice, that people legitimately had a tough time making those dramatic increases. And so that really started as a common platform, as we wanted to understand our citizens, our families, but then really then moved into part of our strategic plan, a joint strategic plan between my administration and the city council, and that was to increase median household income. And so we would track that, but most importantly was really looking at what the cost of our families in our communities and in our neighborhoods were. And so we constantly went back to the Alice, and especially, and it just brought it home, and it was great to see it's continued, but the household budget. So as you saw those budget lines, you really could see the impact that government could have. So it started off with a reason and a commitment to a policy in our water utility that we would never increase rates over roughly the consumer price index, about 2.7%. That has stayed, and for the first time ever, we had multiple year rate structures so that families could plan. We also then started looking at where people lived and the neighborhood by neighborhood, and especially the cost of housing, another major item on a household budget. And we said, how could we drive down the cost of housing? And what are our policies around housing so that we could have an impact? Because our vision was to be the city of choice. People have a lot of choice, and we wanted to make sure people wanted to choose to live in our neighborhoods. And a big part of that is the cost. And so it lended into many different policies and programs around housing. And how do we subsidize housing, and then how do we build housing that could meet that threshold so a family could afford ultimately to buy, but even to rent in our neighborhoods. You know, and the final piece, as a public official, we had launched with our utilities, Vista, a sponsor of this, and others, Urbanova. It is the city's smart city initiative, but uniquely focused on the citizen, and in many ways the cost of living in our neighborhoods and some of our most diverse neighborhoods, being able to use smart city technologies, but in a way that's focused on the citizen and really focuses on what the cost of living in these neighborhoods are. The final piece I just want to close with is now, as the Vice President for Eastern Washington for Primera, our vision, our purpose is to improve our customers' lives by making healthcare work better. And a lot of that has to do, and as you can see, as an integral part of a family's budget, is the cost of healthcare. And so we are so driven to provide that certainty, especially on the cost of healthcare, so that they can access healthcare. So not only is it on the insurance side, but now as a major initiative within our company to look and the launch of primary care clinics, our Vivacity Care Clinics, and the very numbers, I was not aware of it, but to look at the neighborhood by neighborhood and making sure that we are providing that access to our members at a cost that's affordable, and again, linking that back to the county by county approach that the Alice is, and then even in subsequent to that. So I'll tell you, from early on to all the way through our visioning and our strategic plan at the city, whether it be water rates or housing, or quite frankly, and we didn't use it, now wish we would have, although used a lot of the same data, but had a major $500 million initiative launched in my administration in concert with our school district, which is transforming the second largest school district in the state to a middle school system so that we can better focus on 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. Right now, we're a junior high system, but in particularly making sure that it was in those neighborhoods that needed it most, and we put that along with the location of our libraries. So we have the first ever middle school with a public library as a part of that, and then we also moved 2 of our other libraries into some of our most vulnerable neighborhoods. And so I'll tell you, I'll have to talk to the director of the public library system and talk about these new features that you have, that they could continue to look at that and make sure they're bringing the access in those neighborhoods through those libraries and the platform that they provide. So with that, it's great to see the update. It's great to see the interactivity and really the usable way, whether it be vision setting and goal setting to policy making, all the way into the very specific tactical level decisions that are in government. And now, as I serve in the private sector, to meet those families in all of our neighborhoods.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, David. And I hope that everyone can see on the phone how this data can be used to really help inform the work that you do in your communities. So we have, our two other speakers actually were able to get in. So next I'm going to turn it over to Nicole Sherman, who is with Columbia Bank. And Nicole, okay, I think she's on her phone, so you get a picture. You get a picture of her puppy. But Nicole Sherman is one of the executive vice presidents at Columbia Bank, and she's also the board chair for United Way of Pierce County. There you are. Okay. So Nicole, I'll turn it over to you for a few minutes.
Thank you, Donna. I apologize for being on the phone, so I'm going to hold it as still as I can so I don't send everybody on a motion or a wave here. But thank you for allowing a few minutes here. First, I got to say that you can see how powerful a force United Way is, and it's an honor to chair United Way Pierce County in partnership with Donna and her leadership. So thank you for that. And as an EVP for Columbia Bank, you know, I think the angle that I would like to share on this is the information and the tools provided are very powerful, and they can be used for great things. And I think as a company headquartered right here in Pierce County and, you know, in Tacoma, one of the things that we started taking a look at quite a while ago was internally at our own ALICEs that we have within our company. Columbia Bank was one of the first companies to step forward with the $15 minimum wage, prior to that ever being, you know, officially minimum wage, but to assist our ALICE families, because really, like so many, we have team members within our own company that are amazing and doing great work and living paycheck to paycheck and doing their very best to support their families and can't quite make it paycheck to paycheck. And so one of the things that we believe at Columbia Bank is that when our team members are doing well and we focus on them and treat them well, then that's how they'll treat clients. And when clients and businesses are thriving, then of course our communities are thriving. And so my challenge would be to all of the businesses out there is to look internally. And it's such a time in our world right now where, you know, many of our businesses are struggling, and it's time to lock arm in arm and really not only assist one another as businesses, but really remember to stay focused on our people. And there are so many ALICEs out there who are dynamic, who are, you know, the next generation of leaders in many of our companies, and they just need an opportunity. They just need a chance. You know, I like to say they don't need a handout. They need a hand up. They're already working their guts out and raising their families and working hard for the organizations that they're with. So Donna, my challenge for our own company and for all of the businesses out there is to start looking within the company for the opportunities, and using this great information for that. And then obviously as businesses, let's lock arm in arm and go out there and lift up our ALICEs. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Glad you were able to join us.
Me too. Thank you.
So our last speaker on our panel is Dr. Ali Madaris, who's with the University of Washington, Tacoma. And Dr. Madaris is also a member of our ALICE Research Advisory Committee. He has walked this journey with us since the first report. So Ali, I'm going to turn it over to you to say a few words, and then we'll turn it back to Jim for some question and answer.
Well, good afternoon, and it took a while to get in because this seems to be a very exclusive club. So thank you for letting me in. It's very well attended, so I'm really glad to hear this or see this. Working on ALICE data is sort of eye-opening for many of us who have been dealing with the data for a long time. However, the magnitude and the growth suggest that whatever we have been doing, we have to double down now and do more. The challenge is that I don't know if how much you've gone into the data. If you look at, for example, what it takes for a family of 4 to not be cost burden and be, not fall into the category of ALICE, it exceeds some of the median household income of some of our counties, including ours. And one of the major issues that we need to pay attention to is the degree to which this population that's working, and the name itself is quite important in the way we talk about it. These are asset limited, which means they don't have savings that much, and their income is inadequate. And so when we think about what we are talking about, it's a working population, doesn't have a lot of income, and it doesn't have enough assets to get it through a significant event in their lives. Well, the significant event happened, and the significant event is the pandemics. I have been monitoring the data on unemployment since the beginning of January, basically, and looking at least the first 4.5 months of the data through the middle of May, practically, and more. And it suggests that, again, who we are losing in this process in terms of the filing of the unemployment claims that are being filed are primarily in industries with the lowest levels of income. So what that really means is that when the next ALICE data is done, and I'm glad that we're doing this and not simply working with a national poverty measurement, because typically that means that we are talking about a group that is actually out there working full-time, trying to make ends meet. And then when the unemployment wave comes, they're one of the first ones to be hit by. It is difficult to imagine that when we even talk about affordable housing, for a lot of people, they may think it's low-income population, but even in our own county, if you add up everybody is fine, but even in Pierce County, which many of us know, a lot of middle-class families fall into that category. Paying attention to the issues of ALICE right now is so fundamentally important, because it means that 3 months from now, we are going to, God forbid, dealing with a much higher rates of eviction. We are going to have people who are not just simply not earning minimum wage, they're not earning wages. I don't know how fast the restaurants are going to come back. Even at half capacity, they're not going to be able to do much. I can tell you that for Pierce County, the number of filings for food-oriented services is among the highest in unemployment claims. So going back to ALICE, ALICE really puts a light on a fundamental dilemma that we have. We have been watching for 30 to 40 years, service economy with low wages grow as the cost of living has gone up. Housing has gone up, everything has gone up. And as this report suggests, there is this gap between wages and the cost of living is increasing so rapidly that larger and larger population are going to fall into this category of ALICE. So where do we go with this one, and what does research do? Research is really a way of putting light on a topic, but what is more important is to roll up sleeves. We need changes in policy. We need changes in how we think about income. We need to think about how we run our economy in a way that those who work within it are protected. So with that, I'm going to stop, because I know I'm not going to get into details of ALICE and talk about that, but I want you to compare the ALICE data to what you're getting in unemployment data and begin to put two together. So when we look at ALICE data 2 years from now or a year from now, you would understand why the magnitude would be so large, even though between the last report and this already was too large. I'll stop on that, Donna.
Thank you very much. And thanks to David and to Nicole and to Dr. Madaris for taking some time just to share your insights on about ALICE. And so what I think, Jim, do I turn it over to you next? Back over to you? I think
yes,
just the one thing that I would add about ALICE, and we've been talking about this, and I was just in a meeting with several of you that are on this call when we're talking about, how do we, how do we move forward in light of the pandemic, in light of the racial injustices that have always been taking place, but are lifted up even more so now with the murders that have been happening of Black men in our communities across the country. And when you look at Alice and you look at the data, what we're seeing, is the disproportionate number of Black and brown individuals that are impacted. And so to Allie's point, we need to look at changes in policies across all systems so that we can begin to figure out ways to deal with these systemic issues, in particular around racial and social inequities. So I just wanted to make that statement. Jim.
Thank you, Donna. It's a very good one to make. I think that's overall, besides COVID, that's the timing of this report is good for a very hard conversation. So thank you very much for highlighting that. So as always, we want to have a word from our sponsors. And so today we have a quote from Avista. Avista partners with the United Way in each of the communities we serve, said Christine Meyer, Executive Director of the Avista Foundation. We are pleased to support this project that raises awareness about a segment of our population that is employed yet struggles financially. Having a shared understanding of the challenges that people are faced with can help create a compassionate voice behind the statistics and strengthen our commitment to reducing the Alice populace. Again, we show all of our sponsors. We really could not do this without them. I would also like to thank all of our local United Ways and Donna and the panelists for being a part of this presentation today. It was very helpful to have your voices and particularly our local United Ways for helping pull together the ability to bring Alice Report to the Pacific Northwest. My last thank you is I'd like to thank the United Ways of Northern New Jersey. A little over a decade ago, they started this project, and that has now grown into a grassroots movement in 22 states with national data sets for every single state and the ability to start shining a light, as Dr. Madalis said, on the Alice population and the financial and even racial inequities across our country when it comes to financial stability. And so with that, I'm going to open it up for questions. I'll ask folks to go ahead and drop your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand, and we'll make sure that your question gets answered. We'll start with any media questions we might have, and while we're waiting to see what comes in, we have one question about other data sets that measure financial stability, and I'm going to go ahead and unmute Dr. Anglin, Dr. Ashley Anglin, who is our project manager for the Alice Report in the Pacific Northwest, and who can answer that question much better than I can. Ashley?
Thank you, Jim. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's been great to see this launch and this presentation. And so the question was how the Alice household budget compares to other similar measures. So one of those being the self-sufficiency standard developed by the University of Washington. And one of the things that we'll see in a comparison here is that the household survival budget tends to be much lower than a lot of the other measures out there. In particular, the self-sufficiency standard is really trying to measure something a little different. So they're trying to measure kind of what the budget is to be sufficient, a sufficient standard to be able to get by. The Alice household survival budget is the bare minimum cost of these budget items. So in a lot of cases, folks can't even find housing or food at that particular rate. So this is the bare minimum available. And so it's really kind of understates that line. This is that bare survival. So it's not getting people to self-sufficiency. It's not giving you any money in terms of savings or in terms of, paying off debts or any kinds of things like that, where some of these other budgets include kind of savings and some of the items are a little bit more generous in terms of their ability to afford them. So that's one of the main things. And another question related to that was how it relates to, for example, 200% of the federal poverty line. And one of our major criticisms of the federal poverty level is that it's not context specific. It's the same number everywhere. So 200% of the federal poverty line is still one number, and it makes the assumption that the cost of living is the same everywhere. So in big cities versus rural areas, where I grew up in rural Georgia versus where I live now in Massachusetts, I know the cost of living is different, right? So that's the thing that we see here. So in some places, 200% of the federal poverty line is close to the ALICE threshold. In other places, it's wildly different, just depending on how the costs vary. So that's one of the strengths of the household survival budget, is it's built at the county level.
Thank you, Ashley.
Sure.
So thanks, Tim Sullivan, the director of Washington 211, for your comment. You can see he says that 156% increase in rental assistance requests since February for COVID, and on 211. And Dr. Madaris talked about that and how we're going to have this increase in evictions when the eviction moratorium runs out in Washington State. And so just know that United Ways across the state and many other organizations are advocating to talk about the growth in the housing crisis with the legislature. And I think advocacy is the key, but really partnering at the local level to figure out what ways we can reinvent how housing is built. Can we build smaller units, or can we build on government property to bring the cost down? And so there's a lot of options out there, and I know that there's a lot of people working on that. I think so. To that point, someone asked, what does ALICE use for housing costs? And I'll have Ashley back me up if I say this wrong, but the data we get is from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and it's really important to know that this is an average cost of housing in 2018. It doesn't mean that you can find a unit that costs that, because it's the cost of the people who are renting units. And so typically the available units will be at a higher price than the average of the families who are currently renting or paying housing costs. So know that it won't feel right to you when you look at those numbers for your county, particularly for housing. Would you add anything to that, Ashley? Oh, sorry, I forgot. I have to give you power to unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah, so it's fair market rent, which is what there is a part of from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And we also this year added a way to adjust those costs slightly by metropolitan area using data from the American Community Survey. So the fair market rent is generally kind of a whole metro area together, but we know there's variety within those counties that have metro areas, so we also adjust those costs. So this year they're actually a little bit more precise for folks living in metropolitan statistical areas.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions? At this point, just to make sure everyone has the ability to access questions, I will give you the ability to unmute yourself. So if you have a question at this point, you can go ahead and ask it verbally, and that way we make a chance for others who aren't following the chat window. Are there any other questions today? Okay. Go ahead, Ashley.
I was just going to add, since we did have some methodology questions, you can find our full methodology with lots and lots of details for as nerdy as you want to be. If you want to read it all like me, it's there at unitedforalice.org/methodology, and you can download it there. So I just wanted to put that out there since I know we have some data buffs on the call with us.
Good point. Thank you.
Hi, this is Lyle Quasim. What constitutes the nomenclature of fair market housing? Is there unfair market housing? How do we get to that? And it is really important, the language that we use. When I was in human services, we used to talk about fair hearings and fair this, and those hearings were very unfair, and that's why they call them fair. So what's the background on the nomenclature of fair?
I'll just take one little piece of that. That's a whole lot to unpackage there, and I think it's something that comes out of how the federal government does this. But what they generally mean with fair is that it's a percentage of area median income. So they try to look at what people are making and versus what housing is available. But it is a really important point that access and equity is a huge piece of that fairness. And just looking at a housing cost doesn't fully capture that. So that nomenclature comes from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, but I think it's an excellent point to kind of question the use of that language, because in a lot of ways it isn't fair because it's not accessible. It's not available to people at those costs. And as Jim mentioned, it doesn't really take into consideration the housing stock available for people in those in communities.
I appreciate your answer.
And I think it's, it's also really important to highlight the inequities that exist across all of our government systems. And so fair is going to mean something different depending on how you look or what zip code you live in. So I think that's a really good question, and thank you for bringing it up. We also had just a question about whether we will have an update of the data in regard to COVID-19. And so I think we're hopeful that there will be some sort of update and story along the way as we move along. We will, at a minimum, do a full update of this data set in 2 years, which will tell the story of this year. And then hopefully there will be something in the interim. There is a COVID-19 page on the United for Alice that does talk a little bit about what we know currently, and I'm sure that page will be updated as things move along. So with that, I'm going to end our call today and just say thank you all for participating, and I hope that you'll go out and tell the story of Alice in your communities and help us bring that number down as we come out of the COVID economic and healthcare crisis. Donna, any final comments before we wrap?
No, just thank you. This was a fantastic turnout. If you should, if you want separate presentations, I would imagine, Jim, about Alice, let us know. But you can also contact your local United Ways as well, because all of us are, many of us, I should say, are using this information to help drive our work in our communities. So thank you again. And thanks to the panelists as well. Really appreciate you sharing your time with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you, everyone. Take care and have a nice day.
Bye, everyone.